Welcome to another episode of the PFF College Football Show. Max Chadwick alongside Dalton Wasserman here. Dalton, we're doing a lot of NFL draft rankings recently. Got to get back to our roots, though, here as the PFF College Football Show and talk about college football. So what we're going to do in this episode is go over all 12 teams that made the college football playoff this past season and be optimistic about them. Say, okay, here's why they can make it back to the college football playoff in 2025 as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's obviously the goal for each team, is to get back and put themselves in even better position, for all of them except for Ohio State, to win a national championship, right? And then for Ohio State, what is the road for them to try to repeat, right? So I think you have a lot of teams that are on the upswing. There's several of these teams that are bringing a lot of pieces back that could really make a run at the top next year. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun to break this down and see where these teams could still improve despite being in the top 12 last year.
It's going to be fascinating to break down all these teams because obviously college football is different than the NFL. You have basically new rosters almost every single year. The transfer portal with guys declaring for the NFL draft and new high school kids coming in as well. So it's wildly different than the NFL, where like, oh, the Chiefs, like, oh, they got Patrick Mahomes again. Like that's why they can make it back. For college football, it's different. You know, you got to like really take a look at the roster because every roster is wildly different than what it is the year before. Obviously, we're using a lot of PFF exclusive stats here on this show. All of them are available to you guys as well at subscribe.pff.com. And you get grades for NFL players, college football players, all the best NFL draft content, all the best fantasy content, all the best betting content, and access to our 2025 NFL mock draft simulator. You can draft a full 7 rounds for your favorite team and trade players and picks with the mock draft simulator, the best mock draft simulator on the planet. Again, available at subscribe.pff.com. All right, Dalton, let's start off with the national champion. That is the Ohio State Buckeyes getting over the top, winning the national title in the first year of the 12-team era. There's a lot of players that are leaving for them this year. But what are some of the reasons why they can get back and maybe repeat next year?
Well, the first most basic reason is you could argue they've got the two best football players in the country, one on offense in Jeremiah Smith at wide receiver and one at safety in Caleb Downs, right? And they may be eventually both of them top 10 picks. Jeremiah Smith maybe in 2027 a number 1 overall type of prospect at the A.J. Green and Julio Jones level of receiver prospect. But look, they're Ohio State. Even though they're losing a boatload of talent, especially on defense, they've got a ton of talent coming back. It starts with Smith and Downs, and the more I was looking at this, if you look at their offense, if they figure out the quarterback situation, and right now Ryan Day says it's an open competition, maybe it's Julian Sayin, maybe it's the true freshman Tavian St. Clair, but either one of them is going to have a ton of weapons to throw to. You've got Smith, Carnell Tate is coming back, and I would say last year you could argue was the best third receiver in college football. Brandon Innes, I know in the slot, is a guy that you really like. Max Clare, the transfer tight end from Purdue, and C.J. Donaldson. You know, they're losing their two big running backs, Judkins and Henderson, from last year, but you get C.J. Donaldson from West Virginia, who's a hard runner with a lot of experience. So the more you look at this offense, if the quarterback clicks, as they often do for Ohio State, they're going to be a contender. It's just that instead of having a veteran like Will Howard or a C.J. Stroud this year, they've got either Julian Sayin or Tavian St. Clair, whoever may win that competition. So that's really going to be the key, as it always is finding a quarterback. But there's plenty of weapons to work with.
So when Ohio State, one of the reasons why they won the national title this past year was continuity, right? They don't really have the continuity going to next year. They have 15 guys that are projected to be NFL draft picks this year, and also 2 brand new coordinators as well. Chip Kelly leaving for the Las Vegas Raiders and Jim Knowles, the defensive coordinator, leaving for Penn State. But like you mentioned, Jeremiah Smith, Caleb Downs, the 2 best players, I think, in the country. Jeremiah was the most valuable wide receiver as just a true freshman, according to our wins above average metric. Caleb Downs, most valuable safety in the country as well. Max Clare, you mentioned him before. My tight end rankings just came out actually on pff.com, so go check them out. I had Max Clare as the number 3 tight end in college football. So that was kind of an element that was missing in that offense last year. They didn't really have a tight end that could truly rely on, which didn't really matter when you have Emeka Egbuka and Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. And those 2 running backs. But now you get one of the legit top 3 to 5 tight ends in the country, Max Clare. Julian Sayin, who's probably the favorite to be the new quarterback next year. He was a top 10 overall recruit in the 2024 class, so he's got a lot of talent. Carnell Tate and Brandon Innes, mentioned them before. They were each top 10 wide receivers in the 2023 class. Sonny Styles is back at linebacker. Davison Ignosin is back at corner. And Ohio State, listen, yeah, they lose a lot of talent. Dude, they're always recruiting at a ridiculous level. In each of the last 6 years, Ohio State has signed a top 5 recruiting class in the country. And in the college football playoff ranking era, which has been over the last 11 years, its worst ranking in the final poll was 7th. So 11 straight years of finishing 7th or better in the playoffs history. So it's very safe to assume that Ohio State is going to be a top 10 team every single year because they've been that for over a decade. And if you're a top 10 team every year in the 12-team playoff, you're making the college football playoff, right? So I think it's very safe to assume the Buckeyes will be back next year.
With their talent level, it's safe to assume that there's 9 games on their schedule, at least, that they're just not going to lose, right? You mentioned the continuity part of it. I think, you mentioned the 2 new coordinators. One is Matt Patricia, obviously, on defense, but you're promoting Brian Hartline, they're a fantastic wide receiver coach, internally to be the offensive coordinator now, so it's at least not unfamiliar territory on offense. I do think there are going to be some bumps in the road on defense, but offensively, if they get the quarterback situation figured out, and Hartline is as good a play caller as he was a position coach with all those great wide receivers he was developing there, I think their offense is going to carry them a long way. It'll just be a matter, as usual for Ohio State, of just winning those 2 or 3 big games on their schedule.
Absolutely. All right, let's go to the next team. That is the national runner-up, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. I think the biggest reason why they can make it back next year, Dalton, is Anthony Tresh is back on the sidelines for them.
Of course.
Former PFF great. Still their director of analytics there. But honestly, when I was looking at Notre Dame, they made the national championship game last year because of their rushing attack and because of their defense. Both of those should remain phenomenal next year. Jeremiah Love is the best running back in college football going into next year. You also brought back Jadarian Price as well to form one of the best duos at running back. Brought back 4 offensive linemen with significant starting experience. You saw Emil Wagner right there. He's one of the best tackles returning in college football. Leonard Moore, true freshman corner last year. I think he's the best corner returning in college football. You still have one of the best linebacker units in the nation, even with Jack Kaiser leaving. You got Drake Bowen, Jalen Sneed, and Kingston Viliamu-Asa. All 3 of those guys really talented. And also a very exciting wide receiver room, too, with Malachi Fields, who is a Virginia transfer. He had 1,600 yards over the last 2 years. Jaden Greathouse and Jordan Faison as well. So a very, very good wide receiver room. Obviously, brand new quarterback. We don't know who it's going to be. Maybe Steve Angeli, maybe CJ Carr, who is a highly rated recruit coming out of high school. That's kind of the big question with them right now, but they should still have a great defense of Marcus Freeman coaching it up. And also, they have a lot of really, really exciting offensive weapons.
I'll throw a 4th guy in there, receiver, and Will Pauling, the transfer from Wisconsin, who's really been their most consistent receiver over the last couple of years. I know Wisconsin struggles to throw the ball, but in the slot, Pauling can be a really nice weapon. Look, they've got a lot coming back, and I think one of the great things about this past year's Notre Dame team, even though they're losing Riley Leonard and a couple other pieces, right, Howard Cross, Riley Mills, is that they were carried to that national title game by so much young talent, right? You mentioned 2 running backs. They got their top 3 running backs coming back. Aeneas Williams is a really good player with a lot of potential too. So you've got 4 solid receivers, 3 solid backs. A defense is going to be good under Marcus Freeman. It's really just about the quarterbacks at this point. This Notre Dame team, you could argue, last year they had an easier schedule. They had kind of I don't want to say an easier road to the playoff because they still had to beat Georgia and Penn State along the way, and Indiana for that matter, some really good teams. But you've got a ton of talent coming back and a lot of guys who, I think about this offensive line too. They came into last year with 6 combined starts between them. Now they've got an entire 17, 18 game national title run under their belt, and they feel like they can take this same team and go back as long as they get the quarterback situation figured out, right? Obviously, again, Riley Leonard's really the biggest loss for this team, but they didn't throw the ball all that much. It's even possible that, let's say, Angeli comes in and he can throw better from the pocket than Leonard can, even if you lose something with the lack of mobility without having Leonard.
Yeah, and you look at their schedule next year, it's not that impossible either, right? They have to play Miami at Miami in the first game of the year. They have Texas A&M a couple weeks after that. But then you play Boise State, who will break down in a little bit, but they're not going to be nearly as good without Ashton Jeanty. You got USC on that schedule as well. You, of course, got the Syracuse Orange on that schedule. But I'm just looking at it, man. I really don't think the schedule is that impossible next year. They should, again, win at least 10 or 11 games, I think.
They are as talented or more so than every team on their schedule, right? Yep. I think A&M is a game that sticks out because they got a ton of talent coming back, too, especially on offense. They had a great transfer class. The Miami game at Miami is going to be fun. But, I think this Notre Dame team should have every expectation of winning 10, 11 games and being in playoff contention. As long as they figure, even if the quarterback situation is relatively average, look at the rest of this roster. They've got weapons. They got backs for days. Let's be real. You look at this team, if they can run the ball every play, they will. With Love and with Price and even with Aeneas Williams, and Williams can really catch the ball too, give you a lot of easy throws. I think between the run game and the defense, like you mentioned, that's the foundation, and the quarterback just has to fall in line.
Exactly. I think that's kind of the big thing with them. Whereas Ohio State, you have to obviously have a lot to replace. With Notre Dame, it's like, okay, we bring back a lot of the key players from this past team, and you mentioned the blueprint that they'd use to make the national title game. It's going to be the same blueprint next year, and it should still be as effective, if not more effective, next year. So you have some superstars returning from Notre Dame next year, and I feel really good about their chances to make it back to the 12-team playoff next year. Now let's go to the semifinalists, Dalton. Starting off with the Texas Longhorns. Why do you think the Longhorns can make it back to the college football playoff for what would be the third year in a row?
Two reasons. One, I think the first one, we'll get into Arch Manning, but the first one is they have superstars coming back on defense. You think about guys like Colin Simmons, right, who is really, arguably, along with Dylan Stewart, the best true freshman edge rusher and one of the best edge players in the country. You think about Michael Taft coming back on defense at safety, one of the highest graded safeties in the country. Malik Muhammad at corner. Anthony Hill at linebacker. The catalyst of this team this past year was actually the elite play of their defense, the way they fixed the secondary with guys like Andrew Makuba in the transfer portal, the emergence of Jahdae Barron as an elite player. They do have guys to replace like that. There's several guys that went to the NFL. Those two, Alfred Collins up front, but they're starting to get in this cycle with their defense of developing young players, turning them into the veterans, and then developing more behind them and their elite talents. So to me, it actually starts with their defense, and then you go to the other side of the ball and look, any Steve Sarkisian offense we know is going to be able to score points. They're losing pieces on the offensive line, that's true, but you got a Manning at quarterback now, right? And there was some arguments about last year. Should they have stuck with him? Should they have not? Well, there's no arguments this year because Quinn Ewers is off to the NFL too. Arch Manning is obviously the centerpiece of the offense. I think it's big to get C.J. Baxter back in the run game because it felt like, Trey Wisner did a great job this past year. They have Jarrett Gibson as a young player who I believe was he also injured during the season? Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
I mean, they had a lot of injuries at running back. You start in that
C.J. Baxter, too.
You start in that backfield with Arch Manning and C.J. Baxter, and then you have Ryan Wingo, another great true freshman receiver last year on the outside. I think there is a base. It might take a little more time because they are young on offense, but the biggest reason for me is they have a legitimate top of the SEC defense with a ton of star power and still a ton of NFL talent.
And they've had a top 6 recruiting class in the country 4 straight years now, right? So they're always going to recruit at a very high level. Arch Manning, the era is finally here for Arch Manning. He'll be one of the most hyped quarterbacks in college football history because of his last name and also because of how good he looked when he was inserted at quarterback. He had an 88 PFF grade. He's already one of the betting favorites to win the Heisman Trophy. I think he actually might be my pick to win the Heisman Trophy next year. I haven't decided that yet, but I mentioned C.J. Baxter before. He was the #1 running back out of high school a couple years ago. He looked really encouraging when Jonathan Brooks went down with an injury. He had to, be the starting running back, and he showed a lot of signs. And unfortunately, he missed all of last year with an injury preseason. But I'm excited to see what he can do as a redshirt freshman or redshirt sophomore, I should say. And then an exciting wide receiver room that you got there in Ryan Wingo, DeAndre Moore Jr., and a true freshman in Khalil Lockett, who was a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. A lot of Texas people think he's going to be one of the starting 3 receivers for the Longhorns next year. You mentioned Colin Simmons. I think he has an argument to be the best edge in college football. He's at minimum a top 3 edge in college football. You got Dylan Stewart and T.J. Parker from Clemson who have arguments in that top 3. But you got him. Trey Moore is back as well. Really, really another good edge rusher. So a really good pairing they have right there. You mentioned Michael Taft, one of the best returning safeties. Malik Muhammad's one of the top returning corners. Anthony Hill is one of the best linebackers in the country. And Texas has made it to back-to-back college football playoff semifinals now. I think they have the talent on this roster. We had them #1 overall in our Way Too Early Top 25. They have a talent on this roster to get over the hump and win it all next year.
Yeah, no, I think so. And again, it comes down to Manning and his development and just how much Sarkisian gives him the reins, right? It felt like there were times where he couldn't quite always give Quinn Ewers the reins because of some inconsistency. I mean, again, this is the exciting thing about having a Manning as your quarterback, right? As a long lineage of obviously great players, Archie, Peyton, Eli. Now we're getting into the next third generation of them now, which feels crazy. But he shouldn't be asked to do too much early on, especially with the way this defense is playing. But it's going to be fun, too. Was it week 1 or week 2 they're playing Ohio State?
It's week 1.
That's going to be a fun one for sure. So, no, Texas, they have a boatload of talent, and they should be in national title contention.
I think Texas is probably our favorite to win it all next year. And so, in fact, they have the defending national champion against the favorite to win the national championship in week 1 with 2 brand new quarterbacks who have 5-star pedigrees and Julian Sain and Archer Manning. That is going to be an incredible matchup. I believe it's in Columbus, Dalton, so we might have to make a trip down there.
No, certainly. We're going to have to try to do that.
We're going to have to get down there for that game. That's one of the must-see games of the entire season in week 1. Honestly, I'll take the lead here in my Penn State and Nittany Lions on their semifinalists. Just a loaded roster they have coming back. And not only that, Dalton, I would argue they have the best coordinator pairing in the entire country. And Andy Kotelnicki, who remains as OC, Jim Knowles coming in from Ohio State. I would argue the best defensive coordinator in the country. He is now at Penn State. So you have those 2 elite coordinators, a top 5 quarterback, in my opinion, in Drew Aller, 2 top 6 running backs in Nick Singleton and Katron Allen in my rankings. 3 of your starting offensive linemen are back for another year as well. One of the best corners in the country in A.J. Harris. One of the best edge rushers in the country in Denai Dennis Sutton. Zane Durant is one of the top returning defensive tackles as well. Very good linebacker room. Even though you lose Kobe King, you still have Tony Rojas and Dom DeLuca in that linebacker room. Zakee Wheatley is one of the better safeties we have in college football. And Elliott Washington looks like a rising star at cornerback. So just they bring back nearly everyone, obviously losing some superstars like Tyler Warren and Abdul Carter. But you bring back almost everybody else, and you add the best defensive coordinator in the country in Jim Knowles to go along with one of the best offensive coordinators in the country in Andy Kotelnicki.
Very much similar to Notre Dame, when the base of this team we know is going to be the run game with the 2 backs and the defense, which is going to be elite. It always is. And now you mentioned with Jim Knowles, arguably the best defensive coordinator in college football. I believe he's the highest paid coordinator of all time now at over a $3 million a year deal. So I guess they just got sick of him shutting him down at Ohio State.
Yeah.
If you can't beat him, pay him, right? But no, this team has got such a high floor with the amount of talent. Really, we only have one question about them, and it's just the weapons in the passing game. And even then, during the regular season, Andy Kotelnicki was the master of it at Kansas. He did it very well at Penn State this past year. Obviously found an elite player in Warren, but even at wide receiver, he always finds a way for his weapons to punch above their weight class, right? That's kind of a phrase we've used a lot with Kotelnicki, because you look at this wide receiver group, it's pretty average at best, right? This has been the main issue with Penn State, but Kotelnicki knows how to scheme these guys open, how to use the play action, and I'll tell you, I'm with you. I really like this offensive line. It was a pretty young group last year that lost, what was it, 3 starters from the year before?
I believe so, yeah.
I'll tell you what, one of my favorite players down the stretch became your right tackle, Nolan Rucci. There, I think he's a player we're going to be talking about in next year's draft this time of year as one of the more solid tackles in next year's class. But there's a lot to like here. I think between Penn State and maybe Clemson, I think those are the 2 teams that I look at that are bringing the most depth of talent back. Because outside of Tyler Warren, Abdul Carter, Kobe King, this team really isn't losing anything at all.
Yeah, honestly, that's why so many people are high in them, why many people think this is Penn State's best chance to win a national title, which they haven't done since the 80s. So
here's the first question before we even get that far. Are they the favorite in the Big Ten now? With this much talent coming back, with Ohio State with Jim Knowles in, Ohio State losing the talent they did, and Oregon, we're going to get to them, is in a little bit of a transition here too also.
They might be. I mean, they really might be, because, like you said, the whole team is back, essentially. So that, I don't know. I don't want to jinx it for my Nittany Lions.
I mean, it's only February, but I think it's at least at this time of the year, looking at this, a legitimate question to ask. First and foremost, they want to win a Big Ten title. We have this same playoff structure for one more year. Can they win the Big Ten and get that bye week and set themselves up for the Final 8?
Well, I think obviously Ohio State is in the conversation for best team in the Big Ten. I think the other team with Penn State is in the conversation. Dalton's our next team we're talking about here, the quarterfinalists, the Oregon Ducks, who were the #1 team in the country all year, had an undefeated record heading into the playoff. Then they lost to Ohio State in that Rose Bowl in the quarterfinal round. But why do you think Oregon can remain one of the top teams in college football next year?
I mean, Dan Lanning has just proven at this point that he's always going to have this team floating around the top 10, whether it's #1 at the end of the regular season like it was last year. We saw them, was it the year before they finished #6, I think it was, when it was still a 4-team playoff. I mean, they just needed Michael Penix to get out of college football so they could go undefeated. But no, I mean, you've got a lot of talent on this team, too. I think there's going to be some questions on offense with Dante Moore. Now, we assume going in as the starting quarterback. It's not a veteran transfer like it was with Bo Nix or with Dylan Gabriel, right? So we got to get Moore developed a little more. He's a younger player. You're losing Tej Johnson, who was your best receiver, right? You're losing a couple pieces on defense, but Lanning's going to piece together the defense. They've got a ton of talent. You look at Mateo Uiagalelei. You look at bringing Bear Alexander in. You brought Dylan Thieneman, one of my favorite players in the country, in to play free safety. I think he's going to be a fantastic fit there. Look, I think this is a team. They play really good, fundamentally sound football. They're always balanced. Bryce Betcher, I think, at middle linebacker is a huge guy to get back. He had a spectacular year last year. And then I think it's really going to be the ceiling of this team is going to be based on Dante Moore. And I didn't even mention him yet. Mekhi Hughes coming in from Tulane. That's one of the best backs in the country. Yeah. You could not ask for a better transfer running back to come into Oregon than Mekhi Hughes. He could have a huge year. It really comes down to Dante Moore as far as the ceiling, but this team is going to contend for a Big Ten title as long as Moore hits the way that they need him to, and I like that he got a year behind Gabriel to develop, right, because he got a boatload of talent. We saw a little bit of it at UCLA. That's going to be the question, but they're going to play good defense. They're going to find ways to run the ball. They're going to score points. It's just a matter of the passing game catching up, but I think this is another team that a lot of people are going to pick to make the playoff, and they should expect to.
Dan Lanning has just a machine going at Oregon right now because they murdered the transfer portal. Like you mentioned, a top 5 running back in the country transferring in Mekhi Hughes from Tulane, one of the best safeties in the country coming in, and Dylan Thieneman from Purdue. Theron Johnson from Northwestern, very, very good corner, had a 79 coverage grade this past year. And they rebuilt the offensive line with 3 high-profile transfers on that offensive line. There's a lot of people excited about those 3 transfers they have coming in on the O-line. Kenyon Sadiq was the guy. I actually just came out with my tight end rankings like I mentioned before. Sadiq I had number 6, even though he was the backup to Terrence Ferguson. I think Kenyon Sadiq is the biggest breakout candidate at tight end in the entire country. I think he is extremely athletic. He flashed a lot of great things as a receiver, and I know he's a little lighter at 240 pounds-ish. He was still a really good blocker when they asked him to be out there as well. So I understand Terrence Ferguson was the number 1 tight end for them. He got all the love, but I really think Kenyon Sadiq, as just a true sophomore last year, he had an 80-plus grade last year. He is a very exciting tight end to get excited about next year. Evan Stewart is back at wide receiver for another year. You mentioned Mateo Uiagalelei. He could be a first-round pick. And I mentioned Dante Moore. I mean, yes, it is a new quarterback, and yes, his true freshman year had a lot of ups and downs at UCLA, but he was the number 3 overall recruit in the 2023 class. He was the number 2 quarterback behind only Arch Manning that year. Very high ceiling on quarterback, and he showed some of that ceiling at UCLA in his first year, and that wasn't really the best environment for him either. I think we got to remember that as well. And also, this Oregon offense has produced back-to-back Heisman finalists at quarterback with Bo Nix and with Dylan Gabriel. So Dante Moore, I think, could be a dark horse Heisman contender for next year. And then also Oregon, like you mentioned before, they finished in the top 6 in each of the last 2 years, and they have 2 straight top 5 recruiting classes in the country. They have serious talent coming in. I think one of the biggest guys to know for next year is DeCorian Moore, the wide receiver. I think he's going to make an immediate impact for the Ducks next year. Maybe not a Jeremiah Smith or Ryan Williams impact, but DeCorian Moore is ridiculously talented. I think it could be easily their number 1 or number 2 receiver next year.
Boy, these kids are coming freakier and freakier every year, aren't they, especially at receiver? But no, I think it does. It centers around Dante Moore. And look, there's no question about his arm talent.
Yeah.
He's got an absolute rifle. He's just got to be able to reel in the footwork and get the accuracy going. But I think, again, the biggest thing that Dan Lanning did for him was get him in there last year and just have him sit all year.
Yep.
Right? Sit behind Dylan Gabriel, figure out the offense, work behind the scenes to get the fundamentals right, because it's something we don't see in college football very much now, except at maybe a couple of the elite schools, right? Everybody's either looking for an impact guy early, say like a Dylan Raiola, or, somebody in the transfer portal like a Dylan Gabriel who can come in and already has experience, already knows how to run an offense. I think you get a guy in like Dante Moore who gets to sit behind a veteran like that last year, and now he could get a chance to shine after a year of development.
A very mature decision, I feel like, by Dante Moore, too, because when he entered the portal, this was after Dylan Gabriel already committed to Oregon.
He could have gone anywhere he wanted.
Yeah, and started. And he's like, no, I'm going to go to an offense where I know I can succeed. Yes, I won't start next year, but I'll sit on the bench for a year and then start after Dylan. I think it was a very mature decision by him, and I'm very excited to see how that pays off for him. And also, he was originally committed to Oregon. Then at the last second, he flipped to UCLA, and now he's full circle back at Oregon for next year. Let's go to another team, Dalton, in the quarterfinals, the SEC champion, Georgia Bulldogs. They have finished ninth or better in the college football playoff ranking in 8 straight years. They finished in the top 5 in 4 straight years. Right after they lost a first-round safety in Malachi Starks, they might have another one in KJ Bolden. Not until the 2027 NFL draft, though, because he was a true freshman last year, a ridiculously talented safety as a true freshman. They kind of rebuilt that wide receiver room. You can see right there in the portal. Noah Thomas coming in from Texas A&M, a big-bodied pass catcher. Zachariah Branch coming in from USC. He's an electric playmaker. 2 guys, I think, with high ceilings that maybe weren't utilized as much as they should have been in their respective offenses. Tight end room, still really talented. You got Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky both coming back. Dalen Everett back at corner. And then also with Georgia, like it is Ohio State, a top three recruiting class in 9 straight years. Their talent will never be an issue. So, yes, we could always talk about, oh, they lost this and they lost this. Guys, they have at least 3 5-star recruits as the backups for those guys. So they're going to be just fine with talent. And Kirby Smart, obviously, is the best coach in the country as well. They're going to be just fine. So Georgia, yes, they are losing a lot, and they're obviously new quarterback and Gunnar Stockton and all that. There will be question marks, but at the end of the day, it's a Kirby Smart coach team with serious talent. I don't really have many doubts that they'll make it back next year.
The easiest thing to say is kind of that, right? How is Georgia going to get back to the playoff? Well, they're Georgia. They're going to find a way to do it, right? That's the easiest thing to say. But what that really means is how Kirby Smart builds his football teams, right? You still have great players on defense. You think about Christian Miller up front, Dalen Everett at corner. You mentioned KJ Bolden, maybe the best freshman safety in the country last year. At least he was up there. They're always going to have talent on defense, and nobody coaches up a defense, even if they're short on something, than Kirby Smart. That's why he's won multiple national titles. That's why he's maybe the best defensive coach in the country right now, right? You look at the offense and you go, okay, what was the biggest problem last year? A lack of weapons. We lost Ladd McConkey. We lost Brock Bowers. We didn't have enough in the receiving corps. This year, they go out and get Noah Thomas, who I think is a really talented guy from Texas A&M, and we know how good Zachariah Branch can be. He could add a different dimension to this offense that we just did not see from Georgia last year. They did not have a burner on the outside with the potential of Zachariah Branch. Not to mention, he's one of the best return players in the country, right? Kick returner, punt returner. He can make an impact.
Like Percy Harvin a little bit.
Essentially, yeah. It's kind of like that. He's a guy who, with his feet, on any given play in any game, can turn it right upside down, right? And I think Kirby knows the value of special teams as well. I think he's got the best punter in the country coming back, right?
True.
Brett Thorson coming off his injury. Peyton Wood. I mean, all 3 phases matter with Kirby Smart. They're going to win playing team football, playing good defense, and not asking Gunnar Stockton to do too much, right? We've only seen him make 1 start in college football, plus he played the second half against Texas. Does he have tools? Does he have a really nice arm? Sure, but there's some things he's got to clean up, and they have to protect him as well. I do like that they've brought in these new weapons, especially Thomas and Branch, to give him a shot, and they're going to lean on the run game too. Nate Frazier's one of the best young backs in the country. Branson Robinson, they always have a boatload of talent at running back too. So how Georgia is going to get back to the playoff, it's the same way they always do. They're going to play great defense, they're going to play great complementary football, and they're not going to waver in big moments.
Yeah, they bring back Monroe Freeling at left tackle as well. He's a really talented player. I like what they have. Again, there's a lot of questions like Gunnar Stockton. I obviously would have rather preferred Carson Beck than him, but he's a talented quarterback, and we'll see how he does as a full-time starter. And again, it's a Kirby Smart coach team and a Kirby Smart coach defense. They'll always be really good on that side of the ball as well. Now let's go over to another quarterfinalist, Dalton, the Boise State Broncos. They won the Mountain West, and they were the number 3 seed in the college football playoff, but lost to Penn State in that Fiesta Bowl. Obviously losing Ashton Jeanty is the biggest catalyst for why they made that far in the playoff. But if they are going to repeat as a group of 5 team in the playoff, what are the reasons why? Well,
I think what you're going to get now is a team with more balance, and I don't think we need to just discount what they could still do in the run game with a young kid, say, like Sire Gaines, right? And he's a redshirt freshman who looked good early last year, suffered an injury, so they decided to redshirt him before he got that 5th game in instead of bringing him back, say, for a playoff run. So, they're going to be able to run the ball. You got good players like Cage Casey coming back on the offensive line, and the biggest thing is going to be now having a little more balance, whereas if Maddox Madsen can go just from being a play-action threat that's working off Jeanty to something of a solid drop-back passer, right? There's weapons to work with. Matt Lauder at tight end, Latrell Caples at receiver. It's not like they're devoid of talent in the passing game. It's just that Maddox was so young. It was his first year as the full-time starter. He played some the year before, splitting time with Talon Green, but he's an efficient passer who can throw the football accurately on time, and you're talking about a Mountain West that's still it's good at the top, but it's not the deepest conference, right? Really, again, your main competition is going to be UNLV with Dan Mullen taking over there. So if you go out there and you can beat UNLV and you win the Mountain West title again, you give yourself a shot. Is probably between them and the American, one of the two best group of 5 conferences, I would say, right? Those are right now the two best, and then you start looking at the Sun Belt and the MAC and CUSA. But I think between Madsen's development, they're still going to be able to run the football, not the way they did with Ginty, because that's just a freak of nature they may never have again. And then they're going to play fundamentally sound defense. 2 guys I love on this defense, the pair of corners, Amarion McCoy and Jeremiah Irby, they're both back, okay? This defense is going to be really good. They lose Ahmad Hassanein, their best pass rusher, but they're going to be good on defense. They're going to be able to at least function on offense, and I think if they can get a little more out of the drop-back passing game with Madsen, you can make a case for them still to win the Mountain West, and then it's just about who's the highest ranked among the G5.
Absolutely, yeah. You mentioned they're going to have more of a balanced offense next year. Maddox Madsen back after a very solid year under center as kind of a complementary quarterback to Ashton Ginty. You bring back 4 of your 5 offensive line starters as well, including one of the best pass blockers in the nation in your left tackle, Cage Casey. Matt Louder, you mentioned him before, he's one of the better receiving tight ends. And on defense, yes, the cornerback room is really good. I think the linebacker room is loaded. You got Andrew Simpson back for another year, Marco Notarini back for another year. They were really, really good players on that Boise State defense last year. I think that Boise State linebacker room is probably one of the 10 best in the country going into next year. It's a very, very good linebacker room. So, yes, you have your superhero, Ashton Ginty, no longer with the program. It'll be tougher without him to make the playoff next year. But I do think Boise State is probably still one of the top group of 5 teams to make the college football playoff next year.
Yeah, no, I think this is another team. It's obviously not at the same level as a Penn State, but when you look at what they lost, Ginty, obviously a massive piece. Hassanein, their best pass rusher, although I do like Jaden Virgin Morgan. He's a really good player on the other edge for them. And then Shea Oladipo at safety. But when you're losing that few players, and you have these guys now with both a Mountain West title last year under their belt. They played in the Mountain West title game the year before, right? So they've got a lot of them have been in that game twice. And look, that Penn State playoff game, I don't think they feel like they went in there and had no chance, right?
No.
And I know Ginty put up 100 yards and had to break 1 million tackles to get there, but a lot of that playoff game was them not executing, right? Was it 4 turnovers they had in that game? I think it was. Like, a lot of it was just about them. They're going to feel like, hey, we can compete with teams like that if we execute better. So I think it's going to be big for them to get off to a good start and get Madsen really in a rhythm early. Look, you still don't ask him to carry your team, but this is another team that plays great complementary football. Do they have to replace Ginty somehow, some way as a committee? Sure, but I think they can find a way to do it, especially with all the experience coming back on defense.
Absolutely. All right, next quarterfinalist, the final one we're talking about is the Arizona State Sun Devils. And really, Dawn, after a Cinderella run, they were picked as one of the worst teams in the Big 12 going into the year. They win the Big 12 conference. They go 11-3 overall. They almost beat Texas in that quarterfinal round. They went to double overtime in that game. For me, the biggest reasons why they should be back next year: Sam Leavitt, my number 2 quarterback in college football; Jordan Tyson, my number 3 receiver in college football. The nation's best quarterback to wide receiver pairing that we have between those two right there. Xavier Alford, one of the better coverage safeties we have coming back as well. And how about this? 10 of their 11 starters on defense are back for another year. That's big time for that Arizona State team. And then also, yes, you lose Cam Scadaboo, who, like Ashton Ginty, was one of the best running backs in America and carried the Sun Devils offense at times last year. But you got Kanye Udo coming in from Army. He was a really good back for the Black Knights this past year. So I really like Arizona State next year. I think they should be probably the favorite to win the Big 12 again.
Yeah, you could argue it. And I think the Big 12 is still very open. That's a big reason they won it last year, right? Tiebreakers and a 4-way tie and a wide open conference, and the emergence of Sam Leavitt's the biggest reason, right? When you combine, we knew coming into the year to some extent Arizona State was going to be able to run the ball. They had Cam Scadaboo. Now they don't. Now it's going to be Sam Leavitt's team, and Kanye Udo, like you mentioned, is really good. And what better replacement for an angry runner like Cam Scadaboo to go get than the lead back from Army? That makes plenty of sense to me, and he's just going to have to get adjusted to the offense. But I think you still have a very similar mix of what you had in last year's playoff run, right? An emerging quarterback, an emerging wide receiver, like you mentioned, a great offensive mind in Kenny Dillingham, who just knows how to create first downs, right? We talk about a lot of screens and a lot of things that make it easy for his players to produce. And then you mentioned it, everybody coming back on a defense that improved significantly last year. And I think they play with as much effort as any team in the country. There's not, you would think, okay, there's a lot of these guys making 6-7 figures now, and effort should always be a given. But it's something that always stands out to me on both sides with this Arizona State team. is the level of energy that they play with, right? They're not at any point this year going to be an easy out. Maybe they got flaws on the D-line a little bit. Maybe they're not as good a run game as they were last year, but they're going to go in there looking to kick your ass, right? And I think in the Big 12 against teams like Utah, against teams like K-State, against teams like Iowa State, and even Colorado at this point, that's the type of attitude you need to come in with every week, and there's no question about it with this team. So they have their quarterback coming back. They have a lot of talent coming back as long as Jordan Tyson is healthy. Missed the last 2 games with the shoulder last year, but this is a team now that's not going to sneak up on anybody, right? No. And they've got a lot of last year's team. And keep in mind, they're another one. Keep in mind, played Texas to double overtime.
Yep.
A team that, they were 13, 14-point underdogs?
So,
Arizona State was? They believe they can beat anybody on any given day, and that's going to play a big factor, especially with the experience that's now behind them with a Big 12 title run and that playoff game against Texas.
It's pretty simple. I mean, listen, they have a top 3 quarterback, a top 3 wide receiver, and almost the entire defense is back for another year. Like that, in itself, is going to make you a top contender to make the playoff next year, especially in a wide open conference like the Big 12. And Kenny Dillingham's obviously, like I said, a brilliant offensive mind. He'll do a lot of great things with Jordan Tyson and Sam Levin and Kanye Udoh on that offense. All right, Dalton, let's get to the teams that lost in the first round of the college football playoff. Starting off with Eli's Tennessee Volunteers. Why should they make it back to the playoff next year?
So I think there's a good amount of talent coming back here, and the big one is Nico Iamaleava at quarterback, who I thought really came on down the stretch last season, not forcing big-time shots, right? Taking those intermediate throws that set up this offense the right way. So I think a second year, a full offseason as the starter of this offense, I think he could really take the next step in the passing game, because this past year they were very reliant on Dylan Sampson. He's gone now. They're bringing in Star Thomas, who I really like from Duke, but Iamaleava is going to be the key to this whole thing, and I think he very well this year could now carry this team in a way that he's supposed to, right? That he was thought of as the 4 or 5-star recruit that he was.
Yeah.
I know you keep track of those things.
Yeah.
5-star recruit, of course he was. But then you also have a defense that really came on, has some talent too. They were one of the elite defenses in college football last year, losing some guys on the defensive line, some really big names, James Pierce Jr., Omar Norman Lott, but you've got Josh Josephs coming back. You got several other contributors up there, and Jermod McCoy at corner is one of the best players in the country as well. So I think you've got a solid all-around team, just like they had last year, and I think the biggest question is going to be how much further can Iamaleava emerge in the passing game to give this team a little more balance than it had last year?
You made a great point. He did get a lot better as the season went on. I think in the beginning of the year, there's a lot of issues and some warts that were kind of covered up because they were blowing out teams with his accuracy, but he got a lot better as the season went on. I have Iamaleava as one of my top 10 quarterbacks in the country going into next year. You mentioned Jermod McCoy. He's probably going to be a top 5 corner for me going into next year. He should be a first-round pick. And outside of him, too, a loaded secondary coming back for Tennessee. Ricky Gibson III, Jalen McMurray, Boo Carter, they're all back for another year. Miles Kitselman, I have as a top 10 tight end in college football. He's a good receiver and a really good blocker for Tennessee as well. You mentioned Joshua Josephs. He had a 90 run defense grade last year, a 90 overall grade as well. He's one of the top returning edge rushers in college football. Star Thomas at running back now, transferring in from Duke to replace Dylan Sampson. So, yeah, I like what Tennessee's got, man. With Nico coming back for another year and obviously a really good defense coming back for another year as well, I think the Volunteers definitely have a great chance of making it back.
Absolutely. I think they, for the most part, outside of the defensive line, they really have, and Dylan Sampson, they really have the same team as they had last year. And they went 10-2, and they had a really good run. They just ran into the best team in the country on the road in their playoff game, right? And I think Iamaleava, that was the first really, really big playoff-type, championship-type game that he was in. I think that experience is going to help them. And this is a team, we know with Josh Heupel, they're going to score a boatload of points. That's not a question, right? It's just about scoring points in the big games and keeping this defense together. I do have some questions about the pass rush, especially now without James Pierce Jr. It looks like he's probably going to go in the first round of this year's draft, but otherwise, I think this is a really talented and well-rounded team. I think we've seen teams in the past under Josh Heupel who had great offenses, but not so much on defense. He's creating a culture on defense here that I think is really helping balance out this team.
A team that gave Arizona State a run for their money as the biggest Cinderella in college football this past year was Indiana, who won 11 games. That was the most in school history. They had 3 straight years before that of winning 4 games or fewer. So great year for Indiana, going 11-2 overall. And Dalton, you see all those names right there. I mean, those are some of the top players in the country at their positions coming back for another year. Mikael Kamara led the nation in pressures. Elijah Surratt, I have as my number 4 receiver in college football going into next year. You also in that receiving core bring back Omar Cooper Jr. and Mekhi Jackson transferring as a talented talented player as well. D'Angelo Pons, even though he's a little shorter, yes, he's still one of the best corners in college football. Amari Farrell is a really good safety. Fernando Mendoza, transferring in from Cal, he had a 78 grade at quarterback this last year, so he'll be the new quarterback replacing Curtis Rourke. Carter Smith, really good left tackle. Roman Hemby, versatile running back coming in from Maryland. I really like what Chris Ignetti's doing at Indiana. Maybe they won't have the 11-win season like they did the year before with maybe a little bit of harder schedule, but I still think they have a lot of serious talent coming back next year.
I'm going to tell you something right now. Don't sleep on them. Don't sleep on them at all. Look, you mentioned it. I don't know about 11-1, but you know what? This is not. I don't think this is a team that's going to just they had their fairy tale run and go back to 5-7, 6-6. Kurt Ignetti knows how to win. He knows what he's looking for in the transfer portal, and you mentioned it. There are some talented guys coming back. Surratt, Kamara, Aiden Fisher, too, at linebacker, who's been in this system a long time, was with Cignetti at James Madison. D'Angelo Pons is one of the best players in the country. Amari Farrell, Lewis Moore transferring back to Indiana after a stint, was it at Ole Miss he went to last year? He's back in Indiana for the second time. I think it was at Ole Miss.
Yes, it was, yeah.
There's a lot of talent. I like Roman Hemby, the back from Maryland. Obviously, the key is going to be Mendoza, and even it might still be a competition because they brought Grant Wilson in from Old Dominion, too, who's got some real arm talent. Got to reel it in a little bit with the accuracy and some turnover-worthy plays, but he's a talented kid. But I think either way, even if it is Mendoza, he can run this system. I'm telling you right now, an RPO-based system with intermediate throws where he can sling it to Surratt and Omar Cooper all day. I think this is still going to be a very good football team. Again, 11-1 is always hard to predict, especially for a program like this, but I don't think you can sleep on this team at all. If you sleep on Indiana on a day you're playing them, you're going to have an issue because this defense especially is still going to be really good, and it's going to come down to how comfortable Mendoza is in this system.
I definitely think 10 wins could be in the cards. I'm looking at their schedule right now. Once again, a ridiculously easy non-conference schedule. They play Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, and Indiana State. But the Big Ten schedule they have this year is a little harder. They got Illinois, who's bringing back a lot of talent as well. They're at Oregon, and they're at Penn State. Look, so those are some tough games. But they could go 10-2.
If they go 10-2, maybe they have to win one of the Oregon or Penn State games for that. If they go 10-2, certainly 11-1. We know no matter what their schedule is, if you go 11-1, they're probably going to put you in, right? Mm-hmm. If they go 10-2 on that schedule, and maybe they beat one of those two big teams, or if Illinois has a big-time year too, we'll talk about them later in the offseason, but this is not a team you can sleep on. They're still very, very talented. They're a dangerous defense. I would argue last year, for as great as they were offensively, their run defense was the best part of their team. And most of that, outside of C.J. West and Jalen Walker, that's coming back. So I think you're going to have a situation here where some people are going to go, okay, that's over. That run's over. And if you think Kurt Ignetti's going to lay down and go 5-7 this year because he lost some guys from last year's team, you're dead wrong because there's a boatload of talent coming back.
Absolutely. All right, next team we're talking about is the SMU Mustangs, who had a really, really good year, lost in the ACC title game, and then lost in the first round of the playoff to Penn State, but still in their first year back in a power conference, making it to the 12-team playoff is a very, very good year for the Mustangs. Dalton, why should they be optimistic about their chance to make it back?
I think the big reason, and look, they're losing a lot on their defense, but the big reason for me and what's going to drive their success this year is if Kevin Jennings can actually come back with a vengeance. And that's weird to say because he had such a great year after all the controversy early in the year, fighting with Preston Stone for the job, taking it over 4 games in and having a great regular season as the starter. But you get to the Clemson game, and it looked really ugly in the first half before he brought him back. And actually that comeback, even though they lost the game, is what got him into the playoff. And then it was ugly when they went to Penn State in the cold weather for the playoff game. If Kevin Jennings comes back now with a full offseason as the starter, no questions, no Preston Stone. And I know Rhett Lashley brought Tyler Van Dyke in, but that's more because they knew each other from the Miami days. This is Kevin Jennings' team. And if he comes back with a vengeance from those two kind of disappointing outings to end the season, we know Rhett Lashley's offense can put up points. Their secondary is still really good. I don't know if their run defense will be as good as last year with all the pieces they're losing on the defensive line. They had a really good, underrated run defense last year. But the biggest reason is Kevin Jennings taking another step in his development in what is generally a very high-flying offense.
Absolutely, yeah. I think SMU, Kevin Jennings, I have as a top 10 quarterback in the country. RJ Maryland's a top 15 tight end in the country coming off a torn ACL. If he's healthy, he's a really, really dangerous pass catcher. Elite safety duo. We saw on the full screen right there. Isaiah Nokobia, Ahmad Moses. They're really, really good safety. So still an elite safety duo. I believe they had the highest graded or second highest graded safety duo in the country, only behind Ohio State. and it was those two really that was carrying it, and they're back for another year. So they should have one of the best safety duos again in the country. Deuce Harmon's a pretty good corner. PJ Williams is a really good tackle. And I think Cameron Robertson is a breakout candidate at edge rusher as well. So they have some talent returning on that SMU team. And I think, yeah, they are probably a top 20 team in the country going into next year. Obviously, I know a lot of people brought up their schedule last year and why it was a lot easier and why they were able to make the playoff. Next year, they do play Clemson on the road. They got Miami on their schedule as well. They got Louisville on the schedule. So it is a little bit harder next year. So it'll be interesting to see if the SMU Mustangs can make it back with that schedule. But this is still a really talented team.
I don't have any doubt they can play with those teams. It's going to be a matter of going out and executing and winning in big games, right? And again, we saw in the two biggest games last year, the ACC title game and the playoff game, we saw Kevin Jennings fold a little bit. If we see this year that he steps up in those big games, you still have a shot to win the ACC because he's one of the two or three, undoubtedly one of the, I think, the 2 or 3 best quarterbacks in the conference.
I absolutely agree. And probably the guy who's number one, not only in the conference zone, but I was number one in the country ranking for me was Clemson with Cade Klubnik at quarterback. And that's our last team we're talking about today. Won the ACC over SMU, and like I said, the best returning quarterback, at least in my opinion, in the country, in Cade Klubnik. You got TJ Parker and Peter Woods. Each of those guys are the two of the best players in the country at their respective positions. TJ Parker is undoubtedly a top 3 edge. Peter Woods might be the best D tackle in the nation. You bring back all 3 of your top 3 receivers in Antonio Williams, Bryant Wesco Jr., and TJ Moore. And Wesco and Moore, they were both true freshmen last year. I think you can make an argument. When I did my wide receiver rankings, I was considering all 3 of them to make my top 10. You could probably make the argument all 3 of them are top 15 receivers in college football. That's how talented that receiver room is. They're finally back after having kind of a drought at wide receiver in recent memory. After having an unreal run at receiver, they're back to having elite receivers now. And then offensive line, you bring back 4 or 5 starters. Like I mentioned, the defense is loaded. DeMonte Capehart, Avion Terrell, Ashton Hampton at corner as well. Wade Woodaz and Sammy Brown, a really good linebacker duo. This is a loaded defense. Maybe the best quarterback in America. Maybe the best receiving core in America. The offensive line's back. I think Clemson is in. They won the ACC and they lost in the first round of the playoff, Dalton. They can make a much deeper run next year.
Well, they did those things. They won the conference and they made the playoff in a year where they really weren't supposed to, especially after a blowout loss to Georgia, a blowout loss to Louisville. Yeah. They found a way to come back, and Klubnik's development is obviously the biggest story. You mentioned if he's not number one, he's at the very least a top 5 returning starting quarterback in the league. But I think when you look at all those guys you just named, this is one of, I think them, Penn State's on this list too, this is one of the best collections of talent returning to a team in the country. They were so young last year. It's so many true freshmen and sophomores playing, right? So many young kids playing such big roles. I'm not talking about, they filled in, they got some work, they played 40%. No, you're talking about guys, say like a guy like Avion Terrell or an Ashton Hampton, playing every single snap on defense almost. So as such young kids, I mean, the trust that Dabo Swinney had in them, and as far as this team, and they didn't just roll over against Texas. They lost because they had flaws, right, in run defense a little bit, and they didn't have enough balance, but they didn't just roll over. They battled Texas at Texas in a playoff game. This team is going to feel like they should win the ACC, and they should go even deeper and maybe even be a dark horse to win a national title. That's how much talent they have coming back. The only question I have about them really is, do they have balance running the football? I thought they struggled to run the football last year. You mentioned an experienced offensive line coming back, but can they take a step up and get a little bit better, right? That was the biggest weakness for me. But with Klubnik, the receivers, and this defense, I think this is a top 5 defense as a whole in the country. There's not going to be many better this year.
No, they have a loaded defense coming back, and I'm looking at the depth chart right now. There's a lot of people thinking that Gideon Davidson could be the starting running back immediately as a true freshman. He was the number 4 running back coming out of high school, a 4-star recruit. So we'll see if the kid can do that for Clemson. But that'd be big time for them if he could end up being a really good player. Because like I said, he's got a really good old line protecting him, and then also an elite passing game to take the pressure off of him as well. I'm really high on the Tigers next year. I think they are going to be back in a big way, and I think they could be a national title contender, honestly, next year, I think, as well.
Yeah, no, this is a boatload of talent and a boatload of young talent. They had guys who didn't have to come back that did, right? I think about DeMonte Capehart even coming back for getting a waiver and coming back for another year on the defensive line. And now you have a team that looks like it's a bunch of sophomores and juniors, but they're veterans because of this run they went on last year. And Cade Klubnik battled his freshman year, or I should say his sophomore year. Last year, played really well. If that development sticks, one, he's going to get an NFL draft conversations and high in them, considering kind of the open race for first-round quarterbacks next year. And two, this team is going to be really darn good, and I think more consistent on offense than we've seen the past few years before his development.
I mean, Klubnik is absolutely a Heisman contender next year. He was phenomenal. I mean, he had a 63.9 passing grade as a sophomore. He had an 87.7 this past year. He really was – he had made an argument for the Jake Retzlaff Award as the most improved player in the country. He really did make an argument for that award. He was the 5th highest graded passer in the nation this past year. All right, Dalton, obviously, before we wrap up, we have been very optimistic for all of these teams, right? And obviously, it's not going to be the same exact playoff next year. They're going to be different teams that make the playoff. So out of the 12 teams we broke down that made the playoff this past season, who were you at least pessimistic about of making it back for another year?
I think, well, we'll start with the group of, it's kind of cheating a little bit, but I think Boise State, it's going to be tough without Ginty. They've got a good team, but they still have to go on. Probably, you can't lose probably more than one game when you talk about a group of 5 team. Maybe 2 if the group of 5 is kind of soft this year. That's one. I got to tell you, I am at least a little bit worried about Georgia's offense. Gunnar Stockton is very much an unknown. They got to find chemistry with those receivers. A fantastic interior 3 on their offensive line is all going to get drafted in this year's NFL draft. I think they're really going to be, again, leaning into their strengths. Defense, running the ball. I think this offense is going to be a work in progress, but if you're a work in progress in a really loaded SEC that has Alabama, that has Texas, that has Tennessee, that has Texas A&M, that has LSU, all these great teams that are Missouri, even the mid-tier like Missouri, Florida's up and coming, Auburn's got a lot of talent. You don't have enough a lot of time in the SEC to be a work in progress. You get maybe the first 3-4 weeks in the season, and then you're going through the gauntlet. So I think Georgia's really the one I'm watching here. Can they find enough on offense to make it happen again?
I think that's a good call right there. Boise State's the easiest one. That's one where we didn't even have them in our preseason or our way too early top 25, right? Because it's just like, okay, what do they look like without Ashton Ginty, without a superhero running back? What do they look like? Because they were so reliant on him to carry them in games last year. I want to throw out SMU as well. I think SMU lost some really good talent on their defense, I think. But, yes, they're going to be pretty good. I think they're a top 20 team in college football, but they have a little bit of a harder schedule next year. Can they still make the playoff with that hard schedule? I don't know, and I probably wouldn't predict them to make the playoff right now. The other one, too, so I think they're the favorite in the Big 12, which is why if you win the Big 12, you're obviously in the playoff. But Arizona State, it's a wide open conference.
Oh, it's wide. It's once again, actually more so than last year, the most open conference is the Big 12.
Yes.
We could be talking about, Arizona State, BYU's got a lot coming back. Utah, I think I really am going to like with Devin Dampier in there as a legitimate quarterback in there who can do things both ways. Colorado got a lot better last year. Iowa State's always in the mix. K-State, the Big 12 is going to be as wide open next year as it is this year. We have an idea with some of them now. It's not going to be completely upside down like it was last year, but Arizona State, BYU, there's a group of, I think I said this last offseason too with the Big 12. There's like 8 or 9 teams you could convince me of that could win it. And, of course, Arizona State wasn't one of them, and they went out and won it anyway. So it is by far the most unpredictable of the Big 4 conferences. But you look at Arizona State and what they have coming back, they do have a really good shot to win it.
I agree. I think they are the favorite to win it. I'm just saying it's such a wide-open conference that I could see another team winning it, and then Arizona State probably is not going to make it if they don't win the conference. The only one I want to put out there, and I hate to do this to Eli, but Tennessee, it's just a loaded SEC this year. I could see them. I could see he's booing me from the producer studio.
Even if this year 4 teams are going to make it, there's people that are going to convince themselves that there's 8, 9, 10 teams in the SEC with a shot. It's not that far off. There's going to be people picking the Florida Gators if DJ Lagway can develop, right? Or you think about an emerging team like Auburn if Jackson Arnold gets it right. Missouri, they still have a lot of talent, even though it felt like a disappointment last year, but they still went, was it 9-3, 10-3 they went? There's so much talent. The depth of talent in the SEC and the number of teams that at least feasibly could make the playoff is what makes it hard. It's going to come down to those head-to-head matchups.
You got in our
I haven't even mentioned South Carolina yet. They got a boatload of talent.
We mentioned our way too early top 10. We had Texas at number 1. We had Georgia number 7, Alabama number 8, Tennessee number 9, Texas A number 10. LSU number 11, South Carolina number 12. That's just, it's insane how good the SEC is right now. And A&M, I'm really excited about them. I think Alabama's going to bounce back in a big way next year as well. So
buckle up, Eli.
It's going to be a rough. Listen, we still have Tennessee in the top 10, so they absolutely have a great shot at making it. But just I think a loaded SEC.
That's the theme: is that it'll be a rough road for any of them. Doesn't matter. We have Texas at the top right now, but look, those are all really good football teams. You got to go out and execute every Saturday.
Absolutely. I just want to look at Tennessee's football schedule next year, is who they actually have to play. Oh, they have the Syracuse Orange week 1. That's right. Tough. That's a tough go, Eli. Right there.
I'm siding with you.
It's gonna be a rough.
Kyle McCord get that waiver?
No, it's gonna be a rough year for the Orange next year, unfortunately. But Georgia, they have in September. They have at Alabama. They're at Florida. Really not that brutal, actually, now I'm looking at it. So maybe, I don't know, maybe they could.
Georgia and Bama and at Florida,
that's it, though. Like that's 3 games.
3 games is that's all it could happen. That's all it could take for you.
I think he's playing Rocky Top in the
I think it's been proven that if you lose 3 games, you could have an issue.
But if they beat Florida, they go 10-2 with those 2 losses. They should be in the
That's probably true. Well, it's kind of the same thing they did this past year, right?
Yeah.
Where they had a couple and then So look, getting to 10 wins though in that conference is not easy.
So we just broke down the 12 teams that made the playoff last year and why they can make it back next year. Let us know in the comments below who you think will actually make it back to the college football playoff, and be on the lookout for another video coming out soon where we're going to break down 12 teams that did not make the playoff this past year that can make the playoff in 2025. Obviously, a lot of college football content like this coming out very soon, and a lot of NFL draft content coming out as well. We'll be in Indianapolis for the NFL Combine next week, bringing you guys content from there. So please like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of it. For Eli, for Dalton, I'm Max, and we'll see you guys very soon.